She called my suburban plot a junkyard of impoverished dreams and mocked me when I claimed it was my retirement fund. 3 days later, that smirk vanished when her father walked into the boardroom and recognized my signature on the injunction freezing his billion-dollar project. Want to know how it feels to watch an arrogant mistress beg a useless wife for mercy? Pour yourself some tea and sit down, because this story will satisfy you to your very core. My name is Eleanor Bexley, to the outside world, specifically the high society circles of Chicago that my husband was so desperate to impress. I was a woman of 38 who had lucked into a comfortable, albeit decorative, existence. I lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the Magniloquent Mile, dressed in neutral tones that whispered rather than shouted wealth, and spent my days dusting off old pages in a small, climate-controlled studio I called a library. My husband, Marcus, referred to my work as a cute little hobby, something to keep my hands busy so I would not bother him with trivialities while he was out conquering the skyline. He told his friends I restored antique books. He said it with a pat on my shoulder, the kind one gives to a child who has successfully tied their own shoelaces. I never corrected him. I never told him that restoring a book is not about gluing paper together. It is about understanding the structural integrity of the spine, analyzing the chemistry of the ink, and knowing exactly how much pressure to apply before the whole thing snaps. It is a discipline of patience and precision. Qualities Marcus lacked entirely. For the past 6 months, the air in our penthouse had changed. It was subtle at first, like a draft from a window left slightly ajar. But soon, it became a gale I could no longer ignore. Marcus, a director of project development who had always been ambitious, had suddenly become elusive. His late nights at the office became frequent, stretching from 8 in the evening to 2 in the morning. When he did come home, he carried a scent that did not belong to him. It was a cloying, floral fragrance, something expensive but loud, the olfactory equivalent of a neon sign. He would shower immediately, scrubbing away the evidence, but the smell lingered in the hallways of my mind. I did not confront him. Not yet. I watched. I waited. In my previous life, before I became Eleanor the quiet librarian, I learned that information is a currency that gains value the longer you hold on to it. The breaking point, or rather the catalyst, arrived on a Tuesday evening in November. It was the annual cocktail reception for Marcus's firm, a mandatory display of corporate virility where deals were toasted and alliances were forged over crystal flutes of champagne. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the banquet hall, watching the city lights flicker below. I wore a dress I had owned for 5 years, a deep navy silk that draped modestly. It was elegant, timeless, and completely invisible in a room full of sequins and desperate necklines. Marcus approached me, his hand resting on the small of my back with a possessiveness that felt performed. "Eleanor, darling," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "There is someone I want you to meet, a very important new addition to our team." He guided me toward the center of the room, where a young woman was holding court with 3 junior associates. She was radiant, in the way a new coin is shiny before it has been circulated. She had blonde hair that fell in perfectly engineered waves and a red dress that was structured to look like an architectural marvel. She could not have been more than 24 years old. "This is Tiffany Sterling," Marcus announced, beaming as if he had just unveiled a prize racehorse. "Tiffany, this is my wife, Eleanor, Tiffany Sterling." The surname was heavy. Her father was Robert Sterling, the real estate tycoon whose name was on half the buildings in the Loop. If Marcus had hired her, it was not for her resume, it was for her bloodline. Tiffany turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were blue and sharp, scanning me from my simple pearl earrings down to my sensible heels. It was an appraisal, and I could see the exact moment she calculated my worth and found it lacking. "It is so lovely to meet you, Eleanor," she said. Her voice was sweet, but there was a metallic edge to it. "Marcus talks about you all the time. He says you stay home and play with old books. That sounds so quaint." "I manage a restoration archive," I corrected gently, offering a polite smile. "It requires a great deal of focus." "Right. Books, she laughed, a tinkling sound that drew the attention of the men around her. I suppose that is nice. Very low stress. I do not think I could handle sitting still for that long. Daddy, Mr. Sterling, raised me in construction zones. I need action. She took a sip of her martini, her eyes locking onto my dress. And I must say, I adore your dress. Eleanor, it is so vintage. Is it from the early 2000s? I think my mother had something similar in her closet before she donated it. It is very brave of you to wear it. Retro is sort of coming back. I hear. The insult was wrapped in so much saccharin it almost passed for a compliment. Beside me, Marcus chuckled, clearly oblivious, or worse, enjoying the dynamic. Tiffany has a great eye for style, Marcus said, squeezing my waist. She has been helping me update my wardrobe too. I bet, I said, keeping my voice even. Tiffany leaned in, invading my personal space just enough to be uncomfortable. She smelled of that same floral perfume I had smelled on Marcus's shirts for months. The scent was suffocating. Actually, Eleanor, I wanted to ask you, she continued, pivoting the conversation to ensure I felt alienated. Marcus was telling me you were curious about the Skyline Nova project, but honestly, the zoning variances and the floor area ratio calculations are a nightmare right now. We are trying to leverage the air rights from the adjacent lots to maximize the density bonus, but the municipal codes are archaic. You know how it is, right? Or, well, maybe you do not. It is pretty technical stuff, not exactly library talk. She used the jargon like a weapon, wielding terms like floor area ratio and density bonus to build a wall between us. She wanted to prove that she belonged in his world of glass and steel, and I belonged in the past, with dust and decaying paper. She expected me to flush, to stammer, to look at my husband for a translation. I simply smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. It sounds very complex. Tiffany, I am sure you are handling it beautifully. Tiffany smirked, satisfied. She turned back to Marcus, effectively dismissing me. See? I told you she would not be interested in the details. Marcus, it is boring for civilians. I excused myself, claiming I needed another drink. My hand did not shake as I placed my empty glass on a passing tray. I walked out of the ballroom and down the long, carpeted corridor toward the restrooms. I needed a moment to breathe, to realign the mask that was slipping ever so slightly. The corridor curved around a quiet alcove with a balcony that was currently closed for the winter. As I approached, I heard voices, low, urgent whispers. I stopped. I knew those voices. It was Marcus and Tiffany. They were standing in the shadows of a large potted palm. I could not see them clearly, but I did not need to. You have to stop baiting her like that. Tiff, Marcus hissed, though there was no real anger in his tone. Why? Tiffany giggled. She is clueless. Marcus, did you see her face? She just stood there and smiled. She is like a piece of furniture, a boring, beige sofa. I honestly do not know how you survived living with her for 10 years. She has absolutely no fire. She is comfortable, Marcus said. And the word cut deeper than any insult Tiffany could have thrown. Eleanor is safe. She stays out of my way. And once the Skyline Nova project gets the green light, things will be different. I just need to keep up appearances until the board approves my bonus. And then? Tiffany asked, her voice dropping to a sultry purr. And then, Marcus replied, the sound of fabric rustling reaching my ears. I will trade in the old model for the new one. You know you are the only one who understands me. Babe, you are the future. She is just history. I heard the wet sound of a kiss, sloppy and desperate. I stood frozen for a heartbeat. My heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird in a cage of bone. A normal wife might have stormed in. A normal wife might have screamed, thrown a vase, demanded answers. A normal wife would have caused a scene that would have destroyed her dignity and given them exactly what they wanted. A narrative where I was the hysterical, scorned woman and they were the tragic lovers caught in a bad marriage. But I was not a normal wife. I was Eleanor Bexley. And before I was Eleanor Bexley, the book restorer, I was someone else entirely. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and dust from the hallway carpet. I let the rage rise up, hot and blinding, and then I forced it down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in the pit of my stomach. Screaming would accomplish nothing. Screaming was for people who had no other options. I turned on my heel, my sensible shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. I walked back to the ballroom, retrieved my coat from the cloakroom, and told the attendant that I had a sudden migraine when I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, my mind began to race, organizing facts, assets, and liabilities. Marcus thought I was a piece of furniture. Tiffany thought I was a relic. They saw my silence as stupidity. They saw my patience as submission. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. The ride home was a blur of city lights and cold fury. When I entered the penthouse, it felt like a stranger's house. The art on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, the photos of our wedding day on the mantel, it all looked like a set for a play that had just been canceled. I walked straight to my library. It was the only room in the house that was truly mine. The smell of old leather and vanilla calmed me instantly. I locked the door behind me. I moved the heavy oak ladder to the far wall, where a collection of 18th century encyclopedias sat on the highest shelf. I pulled out the third volume from the left, revealing the small biometric scanner hidden behind the wood paneling. I pressed my thumb against the cold glass. The wall clicked and slid open, revealing a steel safe. Marcus knew about the safe. Of course, he thought it contained my grandmother's pearls and a few bonds my parents had left me. He never asked to look inside because he assumed it was full of sentimental trinkets of little value. Marcus never cared about anything he could not immediately liquidate or brag about. I spun the dial and pulled the heavy door open. There were no diamonds inside. There were no pearls. There was no cash. Instead, the safe was stacked with thick, yellowing accordion folders. They smelled of mildew and victory. I pulled out the top file. The label was typed on a typewriter years ago. The ink faded but legible. It was a land deed. Then I pulled out another, and another. Maps, zoning permits, environmental impact surveys, soil composition reports. I spread them out on my large work table, pushing aside the glue pots and bone folders. I looked at the map of the city's outskirts, specifically the industrial district where the Sterling Corporation was planning their billion-dollar Skyline Nova project. Tiffany had mocked me for not understanding zoning variances. She had laughed at my lack of business acumen. My finger traced the red line on the map. It was a small, ugly plot of land right in the bottleneck of the proposed development zone, a plot that looked like nothing more than a dumping ground for rusted metal and weeds. To Tiffany and Marcus, it was an eyesore, a joke. To me, it was the jugular vein of their entire future. I picked up the deed to the property. The date of purchase was 10 years ago. The owner listed was a shell company, Veritas Holdings. I ran my hand over the paper. It was crisp and real. Marcus wanted to trade in the old model. Tiffany wanted to build her father's legacy on the ruins of my marriage. They thought they held all the cards because they were loud and I was quiet. I sat down in my leather chair and poured myself a glass of water from the carafe on the desk. I took a sip. Let them have their fun. I whispered to the empty room. Let them think they have won. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the deed. It was my signature, but not the one Marcus knew. It was the signature of a woman who understood that in the game of real estate, the most dangerous investment is the one nobody notices until it is too late. I was not just a librarian, I was the landlord, and rent was about to come due. 7 days. That was how long it took for Marcus to escalate from clandestine whispers in a hallway to bringing his infidelity right to my dining room table. He framed it as a necessity. Of course, he claimed they needed to grind out the final logistics for the Skyline Nova launch and that a working dinner at home was more efficient than staying late at the office. It was a lie so transparent it was almost insulting, but I nodded and told him to invite her. If he wanted to bring the enemy into the fortress, I would lower the drawbridge myself. When Tiffany arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, she did not look like a colleague coming to work. She looked like she was arriving for a date. She wore a slip dress that clung to her frame like a second skin, the color of crushed berries, and heels that were strictly for sitting down. She handed me a bottle of wine with a smile that showed too many teeth. It was a Pinot Grigio, something young and acidic, much like the guest herself. I welcomed her into the foyer, playing the role of the gracious, oblivious wife to perfection. I took her coat, noting the way she lingered a moment too long when brushing past Marcus. The air between them crackled with a static energy that made the hair on my arms stand up, but I turned my back and walked toward the kitchen to decant the wine. Dinner was a roasted duck with a cherry reduction, a dish that required patience and timing, two things my guests clearly lacked. We sat in the formal dining room, the crystal chandelier casting a fractured light over the table. Marcus sat at the head, naturally, with Tiffany to his right and me to his left. The seating arrangement felt like a courtroom where I was the defendant and they were the judge and jury, ready to pass a verdict on my relevance. For the first 20 minutes, they ignored me completely. Tiffany leaned toward Marcus, her forearm resting on the table, invading his space. They spoke in rapid-fire corporate speak, tossing around names of investors and city council members. Tiffany was particularly vocal about Skyline Nova. She spoke of it not as a construction project, but as a divine mandate. "My father says this is going to be his legacy," Tiffany said, swirling her wine glass. She did not look at me. She rarely looked at me. "It is going to transform the entire West Side. We are talking about 50 stories of mixed-use luxury, a hydroponic park, and a direct transit link. It is the future of Chicago. Dad is pouring $500 million into the initial phase alone." Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on her face with a look of hungry adoration. "It is brilliant, Tiff. And the way you handled the zoning commission yesterday? Masterful." Tiffany preened under the praise. "Well, I learned from the best. Dad always says that rules are just suggestions for people who cannot afford lawyers." She laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. Then, as if suddenly remembering that the servant who cooked the duck was also sitting at the table, she turned her head toward me. Her eyes were glazed with wine and malice. "So, Eleanor," she said, dragging out my name, "Marcus tells me you spend all day with your old books. That must be so peaceful. I cannot imagine living life in slow motion like that. Do you ever worry that the real world is passing you by while you are gluing paper together?" I dabbed my mouth with my linen napkin, taking a moment to compose my face into a mask of polite interest. "I find there is a lot of wisdom in the past." "Tiffany," I said softly, "but I do have other interests. Actually, hearing you talk about real estate is quite fascinating. It reminds me of a small investment I made a long time ago." Marcus choked slightly on his wine. He looked at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about? Elle? You do not have investments. You have that savings account I top up every month." I smiled at him, a patient, maternal smile. "Oh, this was before us. Marcus, about 10 years ago, I bought a small plot of land on the outskirts of the city, just a few acres." Tiffany raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "A few acres? Where? The Gold Coast? Lincoln Park?" "No," I said, taking a sip of water. "It is in the industrial sector, near the old rail yards. It is actually leased out right now as a scrap metal storage facility, a bit of a junk depot, really, but I have been worried about it lately. It seems so desolate." Silence hung over the table for a heartbeat, and then Tiffany threw her head back and laughed. It was a full-bodied, mocking guffaw that she did not bother to stifle. "A scrapyard?" she gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. "You own a literal dump? Oh my God. Marcus, you did not tell me your wife was a slumlord of garbage." Marcus's face flushed red, not with defense for me, but with embarrassment. He glared at me. "Eleanor, please, do not embarrass us. Why would you even bring that up? I just thought, with Tiffany's expertise, she might know if the area has any potential," I said innocently. "I have been thinking about selling it. Maybe I should just get rid of it." Tiffany leaned forward, her expression shifting from amusement to pity. Listen to me, Eleanor. Let me give you some free advice. From one professional woman to a well. To you. Sell it. Sell it yesterday. Industrial land in that sector is dead weight. It is a rust belt. Nobody wants to build there. It is ugly. The soil is probably contaminated, and the infrastructure is non-existent. She gestured with her fork, pointing at me. Honestly, take whatever pennies you can get for it and go buy yourself a nice Hermes Birkin. At least a handbag holds its value. That land is just a hole in the ground you're throwing money into. It is a blind investment made by someone who clearly does not read the market reports. Marcus nodded in agreement, eager to align himself with her superior intellect. She is right, Elle. You have never had a head for business. Remember when you tried to balance the checkbook and forgot to carry the one? Just stick to your books and the house. Leave the finance to the people who actually earn the money. His words were a slap, casual and practiced. He was rewriting history in front of an audience, painting me as the incompetent dependent. I remembered that checkbook incident. I had found a discrepancy in his spending, a hotel charge he could not explain, and he had gaslighted me into believing I had done the math wrong. I looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders slump slightly, feigning defeat. I suppose you are right, I murmured. I just hold on to it for sentimental reasons. It was the first thing I ever bought. But if it is worthless, it is worse than worthless, Tiffany declared, her voice dripping with authority. It is a liability. If I were you, I would beg someone to take it off my hands. She took another large gulp of wine, her confidence swelling to bursting point. In fact, she continued, slurring slightly, if you are really desperate for pocket money, I could probably ask my dad to buy it. He needs a place to park the heavy machinery for Skyline Nova, a temporary staging ground. He could use your little junk pile for a year or two before we pave over it. He would probably pay you peanuts, but it is better than nothing, right? The air in the room seemed to freeze. This was the moment, the pivot point. I lifted my head and looked directly at her. My face remained pleasant, but I let the warmth drain from my eyes until they were flat and hard. Are you sure, Tiffany? I asked, my voice steady. Are you absolutely certain that your father, the great Robert Sterling, has no interest in that specific area? That he would only want it for parking bulldozers? Tiffany scoffed, rolling her eyes at my persistence. I am 100% sure. Eleanor, my father only cares about prime real estate, waterfronts, skylines, gold mines. He does not waste his time with garbage dumps in the middle of nowhere. He probably does not even look at that part of the map. I held her gaze for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. I was memorizing the arrogance in her pupil, the way her lip curled in disdain. I was engraving this image onto the hard drive of my memory so I could replay it when I destroyed her. Good to know, I said, picking up my wine glass. Thank you for your honesty. Tiffany, it is truly eye-opening. I took a sip of the Pinot Grigio. It tasted cheap, but suddenly, the finish was incredibly sweet. The rest of the dinner blurred into a monologue of Tiffany's greatness. With Marcus acting as her sycophantic chorus, they finished 2 bottles of wine when they finally moved to the living room for brandy. I excused myself to clear the table. I carried the plates to the kitchen, the sounds of their laughter echoing down the hallway. Marcus was playing jazz on the stereo. A playlist I had curated for our anniversary 3 years ago. The disrespect was total. I did not load the dishwasher. Instead, I left the mess where it was. I walked past the living room, catching a glimpse of Tiffany's hand resting on Marcus's knee, her fingers tracing the fabric of his trousers. I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor, past the master bedroom where I slept alone most nights, and into my study. I locked the door. The mask fell off. My face did not crumple into sadness. It settled into the cold, sharp lines of a general surveying a battlefield. I sat at my desk and opened my tablet. I did not open a book restoration app or a shopping site. I opened a secure server, entering a password that was 20 characters long. The screen illuminated my face with a blue glow. I pulled up the latest city planning schematics, files that were not public record. data I had acquired through channels from my past life that remained loyal to the legend of the silence. I zoomed in on the Skyline Nova project. It was massive, a sprawling beast of glass and ambition that promised to revitalize the west side of Chicago. I looked at the power grid layout. I looked at the sewage main lines. I looked at the fiber optic trunk lines. Robert Sterling had designed a masterpiece, but he had made one fatal error. He had assumed that the path of least resistance would always be open to him. I toggled the overlay for property ownership. The entire map turned blue, representing the Sterling Corporation's acquisitions. They owned everything: the factory district, the old warehouses, the residential blocks to the north, everything, except for one small, jagged red polygon right in the center of the utility corridor. My garbage dump. Tiffany was right about one thing. The land was ugly. It was covered in rusted shipping containers and overgrown weeds. But what she did not know, what her arrogance blinded her to, was what lay underneath. My land sat directly on top of the primary junction for the city's high-voltage underground cables and the main water pressure valve for that entire district. I tapped the screen, bringing up the technical report. Critical infrastructure node. Sector 4. Status: private ownership, Veritas Holdings. Restriction: no heavy construction within 100 yards without owner consent, without my land. Skyline. Nova could not connect to the power grid. They could not turn on the lights. They could not flush the toilets. They could not dig a foundation without risking a city-wide blackout that would cost them billions in fines. Robert Sterling needed my junk pile more than he needed oxygen, and his daughter had just told me, to my face, that he considered it trash. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly in the silence of the room. Downstairs, I heard the front door slam. Tiffany was leaving. Marcus would be coming upstairs soon, smelling of her perfume and his own smug satisfaction. He would tell me I did a good job with the duck. He would tell me not to worry about the business talk, that it was all over my head anyway. I looked at the red shape on the map one last time. It looked like a heart, a mechanical, iron heart that I held in the palm of my hand. I closed the tablet. Sleep well. Tiffany, I whispered, dream of your skyline, because when you wake up, you are going to find that the ground beneath your feet belongs to the woman you called a fool. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and sat there for a long time, listening to the silence. It was not empty. It was heavy. It was the sound of a storm holding its breath. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Marcus and Tiffany had made, one must first understand who I was before I became Mrs. Marcus Bexley, the woman who dusted books for a living. 15 years ago, in the steel canyons of New York City, I was not known as Eleanor. I was known in the boardrooms of Lower Manhattan by a different name. They called me the Silence. It was not a nickname born of affection. It was a moniker earned through a specific and terrifying negotiating tactic. When I walked into a merger meeting or a hostile takeover negotiation, I did not shout. I did not pound the table. I simply sat there, perfectly still, listening to the opposing counsels spin their webs of logic and inflated valuations. I would let them talk until they ran out of air, until they began to doubt their own figures, until the silence in the room became so heavy it felt like physical pressure. Only then would I speak, and when I spoke, it was to dismantle their entire argument with a single, surgical fact that they had overlooked. I was 23 years old when I orchestrated the acquisition of the failing Dalloway Steel conglomerate, stripping it down and selling the assets for a 300% profit. By the time I was 28, I was the youngest senior risk analyst at the most aggressive hedge fund on Wall Street. I specialized in distressed assets and land acquisition. I could look at a map and see not just geography, but the future flow of capital. I saw where the highways would expand, where the water tables would shift, and where the city would inevitably bleed into the suburbs. Then I met Marcus. He was charming, in that eager puppy dog way that ambitious but mediocre men often are. He was handsome, full of big dreams, and desperately insecure. On our third date, he confessed that he felt intimidated by successful women. He said he wanted a partner who would be his sanctuary, not his competition. He wanted a home, a soft place to land, a wife who would look at him with adoration rather than analysis. I was tired. I was burnt out from 80-hour work weeks and the soulless grind of high finance. I fell in love with the idea of being soft. I fell in love with the fantasy of a quiet life. So, I made a choice. I retired. I buried the silence. I packed away my tailored suits, put on soft cashmere cardigans, and allowed Marcus to believe he was the provider. I let him think he was the shark. While I was content to be the water he swam in, I dimmed my light so he could shine. It was the greatest gift I ever gave him, and the only one he never appreciated. But I did not lobotomize myself. 10 years ago, shortly after we moved to Chicago so Marcus could take a junior executive position, I was bored. I began studying the municipal development plans for the next 2 decades. I noticed a discrepancy in the city's long-term infrastructure roadmap. The city planners had designed a new power grid expansion to support the Western District, but they had made a critical error in their topography surveys. They had assumed a straight line of access through the old industrial quarter. They were wrong. There was a geological depression, a marshy sinkhole that made laying heavy underground cables impossible in 90% of that sector. There was only one safe corridor, a narrow strip of stable bedrock, barely 4 acres wide, that ran right through the middle of the proposed development zone. If anyone wanted to build anything substantial in the West Side, say, a billion-dollar luxury complex like Skyline Nova, they would need to run their main power conduits, their fiber optics, and their high-pressure water mains through that specific strip of land. Without it, their skyscrapers would be nothing more than dark, hollow shells. So, I bought it. I bought it for $40,000. It was dirt cheap because on the surface, it was a dump. It was a flat, ugly expanse of gravel and weeds, zoned for light industrial use. I purchased it under a shell company I incorporated in Delaware, named Veritas Holdings. No one looked twice. To the world, Veritas Holdings was just another faceless entity holding a worthless asset. To me, it was a retirement plan, or, as it turned out, an insurance policy against a husband who would eventually decide I was obsolete. The morning after the dinner party, I waited until Marcus left for work. He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture, and told me he would be late again. "Don't wait up," he said. "Big strategy meeting?" I watched his Porsche pull out of the driveway. As soon as he was gone, the transformation began. I walked into my library and locked the door. I did not sit in the reading chair. I sat at the heavy oak desk, my posture straightening, my eyes losing the soft, hazy look of the book restorer. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in a decade. It rang twice. Arthur Penhaligon. A voice rasped. It was a voice like grinding stones, deep and unyielding. Arthur was 70 years old, a lawyer who terrified other lawyers. He had been my mentor, my legal shield, and the only person in Chicago who knew exactly who Eleanor Bexley used to be. "Hello, Arthur," I said. There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy silence, then a low chuckle. "Eleanor," Arthur said, "I was wondering when you would get bored of playing house. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you finally ready to get back in the game?" "You could say that," I replied, my voice cool and steady. "I need you to reactivate Veritas Holdings, full operational status, update the corporate seal, and Arthur, I need you to prepare for a siege." "Who is the target?" he asked. "Sterling Corporation." I said. I heard the sound of a lighter clicking, followed by the sharp intake of breath. Arthur was smoking a cigar, a habit he refused to quit. "Robert Sterling?" Arthur asked, sounding impressed. "You do not start small, do you? What did he do?" "His daughter is sleeping with my husband," I said, "and they plan to build a billion-dollar project. They think they own the land. They do not. I do, and they just insulted the landlord." I could hear the smile in Arthur's voice. "I will have the paperwork ready by noon. Welcome back." "Eleanor," I hung up the phone. Step 1 was complete. Now for step 2. I needed evidence. Not just suspicions, not just overheard conversations, but cold, hard, admissible facts. If I was going to dismantle Marcus, I needed to know exactly how much he had stolen from me. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank accounts. Marcus thought he was clever. He handled the big bills, while I managed the household groceries. He assumed I never looked at the transaction histories of the investment accounts. I downloaded 5 years of statements. I imported them into a forensic accounting software I used to use for auditing distressed companies. I set the parameters to flag any irregular withdrawals, any recurring payments to unverified vendors, and any cash transfers exceeding $500. The software ran for 3 minutes. When the report popped up, the screen was a sea of red flags. It was worse than I thought. Marcus had been siphoning money for 2 years. He had set up a recurring payment to a consulting firm called TLS Solutions, $2,000 a month, then $3,000, then $5,000. I ran a quick search on TLS Solutions. It was a limited liability company registered to a residential address in the Gold Coast. I pulled up the street view. It was a luxury apartment complex. I cross-referenced the address. Unit 4B. Tenant, Tiffany L. Sterling. He was paying her rent. He was using our joint savings, the money we had supposedly put aside for a vacation home, to pay for his mistress's apartment. But that was not all. I scrutinized the credit card statements. There were charges at high-end jewelers, a diamond tennis bracelet purchased 6 months ago for $8,000. I had never received a diamond bracelet. There were weekend stays at the Four Seasons in downtown Chicago, listed as business conferences. There were dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants on Tuesday nights while I sat at home eating leftovers. The final insult was a withdrawal made just 2 days ago. $10,000, cash. I traced the timeline. That was the day Tiffany had started her internship. It was a signing bonus. My husband had paid his mistress a signing bonus with my money. I sat back, staring at the screen. The rage I felt was not the hot, tearful anger of a betrayed wife. It was the cold, white-hot fury of a defrauded investor. Marcus had breached his fiduciary duty to this marriage. He had embezzled emotional and financial capital. In the world of high finance, when an executive embezzles funds, you do not just fire him, you strip him of his assets, you destroy his reputation, and you ensure he never works in the industry again. I was not just going to divorce Marcus. I was going to audit him into oblivion. I spent the next 4 hours compiling a dossier. I synced the GPS data from his car's navigation system, which he foolishly linked to our family cloud account, with the credit card charges. It was a perfect map of infidelity. I could see exactly where he was when he claimed to be at the office. I could see the hours his car sat parked in the guest garage of Tiffany's building. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had enough evidence to bury him in any divorce court in Illinois, but I did not want a settlement. I wanted total capitulation. A notification pinged on my email. It was a message forwarded from the public contact form on the Veritas Holdings website, which redirected to a secure server only I could access. Subject: Purchase Inquiry. Lot 49B. Urgent. I opened it. The email was from a junior acquisition associate at Sterling Corporation. It was a form letter, impersonal and arrogant. To the owner of Lot 49B, we represent the Sterling Corporation. We are currently acquiring properties in the West District for an urban renewal project. Our records indicate you own a parcel of undeveloped land in this sector. We have assessed the value of your property based on current industrial zoning rates. We are prepared to offer you $55,000 for the full title transfer. This is a generous offer, 10% above market value for scrap land. Please sign the attached electronic intent to sell. We require a response within 24 hours. Sincerely, Kyle Jenkins, Junior Analyst, Sterling Corp., $55,000. They were offering me $15,000 in profit for the key to $1 billion kingdom. It was insulting. It was laughable. It was exactly what Tiffany had said they would do: offer peanuts for the garbage dump. They thought they were dealing with a ghost. They thought Veritas Holdings was some absentee owner who would jump at the chance to liquidate a dead asset. I hit reply. I did not use a template. I did not use legal jargon. I typed a response that was short, sharp, and designed to draw blood. Dear Mr. Jenkins, your offer of $55,000 has been received. Veritas Holdings is aware of the Skyline Nova project. We are also aware that Lot 49B contains the only viable easement for the Sector 4 high-voltage junction box and the primary water pressure valve required for your foundation permits. We are not interested in selling, not for $55,000, not for $5 million. Furthermore, be advised that any unauthorized entry of Sterling Corporation machinery onto Veritas property will be met with immediate legal injunctions for trespassing. We suggest you redraw your blueprints. Regards, the management. I hovered my finger over the send button. Sending this email was a declaration of war. Once I sent this, there was no going back to the quiet wife. There was no going back to the book restorer. Sending this meant waking up the silence. It meant destroying the comfortable, safe life I had built for 10 years. I looked at the photo of Marcus and me on the desk. He looked so happy. His arm around me, his smile wide and confident. He looked like a man who thought he had it all figured out. I thought about the smirk on Tiffany's face when she told me to buy a handbag. I thought about the $10,000 in cash missing from our account. I pressed send. The message whooshed away. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was absolute, but it was no longer heavy. It was charged. It was the calm before the artillery barrage. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging on the back of the door. I looked at myself. I saw the crow's feet around my eyes, the softness of my chin, but beneath that, I saw the shark swimming up from the deep. Welcome back, Eleanor, I whispered to my reflection. Let's go hunting. The machinery of the Sterling Corporation began to grind with the deafening noise of a beast that had been starved for too long. The Skyline Nova project had entered what the industry called the red zone, that critical period where financing, permits, and demolition had to synchronize perfectly, or the interest rates on the loans would begin to eat the profit margins alive. Robert Sterling was a man who moved mountains, but even he could not move a mountain if he did not own the ground it stood on. He had delegated the final land acquisition to his daughter. It was supposed to be a victory lap for Tiffany, a simple task to prove to the board of directors that she was more than just a nepotism hire. Her instructions were clear. Secure the peripheral lots for the electrical substation and the water filtration unit. It was the unglamorous part of the project, the guts of the building that no one would see, but without which the luxury towers would be uninhabitable. Tiffany, in her infinite wisdom, had scanned the map and recognized the coordinates of the troublesome Lot 49B. She remembered my dinner table confession about the scrapyard in her mind. The narrative was already written. I was the desperate, clueless housewife sitting on a gold mine I did not understand, and she was the benevolent corporate shark coming to relieve me of my burden. She believed I owned a sliver of land, a meaningless patch of dirt that she could bully me out of with pocket change. She did not call to make an appointment. That would have implied respect. Instead, she marched into my library on a Tuesday afternoon. The library was empty of customers, a sanctuary of dust motes dancing in the pale afternoon light and the smell of beeswax polish. I was at the counter, carefully repairing the spine of a 19th-century botanical guide. The bell above the door chimed, not with its usual gentle tinkle, but with a violent jangle as the door was thrown open. Tiffany stood there, framed by the doorway, wearing a power suit that cost more than my car. She looked out of place among the shelves of worn leather and parchment, like a plastic doll dropped into an oil painting. She walked straight to the counter and slapped a thick manila folder down on the wood. The sound echoed through the quiet room. I looked up, keeping my hands steady on the book binding. "Hello, Tiffany," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you looking for a first edition?" She laughed. A sharp barking sound. "Cut the act. Eleanor, I am here to save you from yourself." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the folder. "I saw the email your little management company sent. Veritas Holdings. Cute name. Sounds very serious for a company that manages a pile of rusted metal." My father was annoyed. Eleanor, very annoyed. He does not like it when people play hard to get. I carefully closed the book I was working on and set it aside. I am not sure what you mean. Tiffany, Veritas Holdings manages my affairs. If they rejected an offer, it must have been insufficient. Insufficient? She scoffed. Eleanor, it is a dump, a literal dump. We are offering you market value plus 5%. That is 5% of pure pity money because I feel bad that you are married to a man who clearly has bigger ambitions than you can support. She leaned over the counter, invading my space, her eyes gleaming with malice. Take the deal. Sign the transfer papers. Take the $55,000 and go renovate this dusty old tomb. Or better yet, go to a spa. Fix whatever is going on with your face. You look tired. I looked at the folder. Inside was a standard purchase agreement, the kind they use to bully widows and pensioners into selling their family homes for pennies on the dollar. It was a predator's contract. I picked up the folder and handed it back to her without opening it. No, thank you. Tiffany. Her smile faltered. Excuse me? I am not selling. I said, my tone as light and conversational as if we were discussing the weather. I have been thinking about it, and I have decided to keep the land. Keep it? For what? She demanded, her voice rising. It is an industrial wasteland. Eleanor, what are you going to do with it? Build a monument to your boredom? Actually, I said, looking her dead in the eye, I was thinking of starting a vegetable garden. The silence that followed was absolute. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth slightly open, processing the sheer absurdity of my statement. A vegetable garden? She repeated, her voice trembling with rage. You are blocking $1 billion development because you want to grow carrots? Organic carrots, I corrected gently. The soil in that area has a very interesting mineral profile. Tiffany slammed her hand onto the counter. You are insane. You are actually insane. Do you have any idea who my father is? Do you know what he does to people who stand in his way? I do. I said, he builds things, usually on other people's land. Listen to me, you pathetic little bookworm, she hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the stale coffee on her breath. If you do not sign this paper by tomorrow morning, I will have my father call the zoning commission. We will have your land redesignated as a hazardous waste site. We will bury you in fines. We will make that land so toxic on paper that you will have to pay us to take it off your hands. You will get nothing. Zero. I smiled. It was the smile of a teacher watching a toddler throw a tantrum in a sandbox. That sounds very complicated. Tiffany, I said, but before you make those calls, perhaps you should check the deed again. Check the ownership structure of Veritas Holdings. You might find it is not as simple as bullying a housewife. She snatched the folder off the counter. I do not need to check anything. I know exactly who you are. You are a speed bump, and speed bumps get flattened. She spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the window panes. I watched her go, a sense of calm settling over me. She had taken the bait. She believed my refusal was an act of petty spite, a domestic power play. She had no idea she had just walked away from the only lifeline her father's company had. Tiffany returned to the Sterling headquarters and did exactly what I expected her to do. She lied. She told Robert Sterling that the owner of the lot was an obstinate, senile old woman who was holding out for a little more attention. She told him she had it under control, that she would massage the situation. She did not mention Veritas Holdings. She did not mention the vegetable garden. She framed it as a minor annoyance, a loose thread she would snip off in a day or two. That evening, the second wave of the attack arrived. Marcus came home early. This in itself was a red flag. For months, he had not walked through the door before 9 at night. But today he was home at 6:30, carrying a bouquet of lilies, my least favorite flower, a fact he would have known if he had paid attention at any point in the last 10 years. He found me in the kitchen, chopping onions for a soup. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my neck. He smelled of Tiffany's perfume. It was fresh, meaning he had seen her right before coming home. They had coordinated this. Hey, honey, he murmured, his voice thick with false affection. "You look beautiful today." I stiffened slightly but did not pull away. "Hello, Marcus. You are home early. I just wanted to spend some time with my lovely wife," he said, releasing me and leaning against the counter. He loosened his tie, playing the role of the weary provider. He watched me chop the onions for a moment before casually dropping the hook. "So, Tiffany called me today. She was pretty upset." I kept my eyes on the knife. "Oh, what happened?" "She said she came to see you about that old plot of land, the scrapyard. She said you refused to sell." I stopped chopping and turned to him, wiping my hands on a towel. "I did. She was very rude. Marcus, she threw a folder at me." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Elle, I know Tiffany can be a little intense. She is young. She is under a lot of pressure from her dad. But you have to understand, this is important, not just for her, but for me." "For you?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Yes, for me," he said, stepping closer and taking my hands in his. "This project is my big break. If Skyline Nova goes through smoothly, I get a massive bonus. I get a promotion. We are talking about a seat at the big table. Eleanor, this is our future. And right now, the only thing standing in the way of my success is you." He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes, the same ones that had convinced me to marry him. "Do not be selfish, Elle," he said softly. "Why do you even want that land? It is useless. Sell it to them. Do it as a favor to me. Show me you support my career." I pulled my hands away gently. "It is not that simple. Marcus, the paperwork is complicated. I signed everything over to a management company years ago because I did not want to deal with the taxes. Veritas Holdings controls the deed now. I cannot just sign it away on a whim. They have protocols." Marcus groaned, exasperated. "Protocols? Eleanor, you are the owner. You tell them what to do." "Just call them and tell them to accept the offer." "I cannot." I lied smoothly. "The contract has a lock-in clause. It takes time to unravel. And honestly, Marcus, I do not like the way Tiffany spoke to me. She threatened me. She said she would turn my land into a toxic waste site. Why should I help a woman who treats your wife like dirt?" Marcus's face hardened. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "Because that woman is the daughter of the man who signs my paychecks," he snapped. "God, Eleanor, can you just stop being so difficult for once? Just fix it. Call your little management company and tell them to sell. I do not care how you do it. Just get it done." He stormed out of the kitchen, leaving the lilies on the counter where they slowly began to wilt. He thought he had won. He thought he had bullied me into submission. He assumed that tomorrow I would make a phone call and capitulate. He was right about one thing. I did make a phone call, but it was not the one he wanted. That night, while Marcus slept in the guest room, punishing me with his absence, I sat in my study with the lights off, illuminated only by the glow of my laptop screen. I was on a video call with Arthur. "Did you get the liquidity report?" I asked. Arthur nodded on the screen. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction. "Yes, we have $5 million in the war chest. Eleanor, liquidated from your offshore bonds this afternoon. What is the play?" I pulled up the map of the industrial sector again. Tiffany and Robert think they are fighting a battle for one lot. Lot 49B. They are focused on the bottleneck. They are ignoring the flanks. I highlighted 3 small parcels of land surrounding my property, Lot 48A, Lot 49C, and a narrow strip of access road designated as Lot 50. "These 3 lots," I said, pointing at the screen. "They are currently owned by a bankruptcy trust for a defunct trucking company. They are small, seemingly useless strips of concrete. But if you look at the city survey, they control the only physical access points to Lot 49B. If I own Lot 49B, I control the underground power. If I own the surrounding lots, I control the surface access. Even if they manage to seize my land through eminent domain, which would take years, they would never be able to get their trucks onto it to dig because I would own the road leading to the gate. Buy them." I commanded. "All of them?" Arthur asked. "All of them. I said. Offer the bankruptcy trust 20% above asking price for an immediate cash close. I want the deeds in the name of 3 separate shell companies: Equitas Limited, Justicia Corporation, and Nemesis Incorporated. Arthur chuckled. You are enjoying the naming convention a little too much. Eleanor, I want them to know it is personal. I said, when do we close? By tomorrow morning. The deeds will be digital. Arthur assured me. Good. I ended the call. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, in a glass tower, Robert Sterling was sleeping the sleep of the arrogant, believing his daughter had handled the old woman somewhere in a luxury apartment. Tiffany was probably laughing with her friends about the housewife who wanted to grow vegetables. They thought they were building a trap for me. They thought they could squeeze me with threats and emotional blackmail. They did not realize that while they were trying to break down the front door, I had just bought the walls, the roof, and the floorboards. I was not just blocking their project, I was building a cage, and tomorrow morning, when the deeds were recorded, I would lock the door and swallow the key. I went back to the bedroom and slipped into bed beside Marcus. He shifted in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. I looked at his face, the face I had loved for 10 years. You wanted a helper. Marcus, I whispered into the darkness. You wanted a wife who would support your career. Well, I am going to teach you the most valuable lesson of your life. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, dreaming of walls closing in. The invitation to the Skyline Nova launch gala arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold leaf. It was a summons, not a request. Marcus told me I had to go. Appearances. Eleanor, he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, not meeting my eyes. People need to see a stable home life. It makes the investors feel secure. So I went. I wore a gown of slate gray silk, structured and severe, like armor disguised as evening wear. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel on Marcus's arm, feeling the heat of his palm against my elbow, a touch that used to mean affection, now merely a mechanism of steering me into place like a prop. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering jewels, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of deals being struck. The moment we crossed the threshold, Marcus dropped my arm. Get yourself a drink, Elle, he muttered, his eyes already scanning the crowd. I see the vice mayor over there. I need to network. Try not to look so, bored. He vanished into the throng before I could answer, gravitating instantly toward a cluster of people laughing too loudly near the champagne tower. At the center of that cluster was Tiffany Sterling. She was wearing a dress that was less a garment and more a declaration of war, crimson sequins, backless, and slashed to the thigh. She held a flute of champagne like a scepter. When Marcus approached, her face lit up with a possessive radiance that she didn't even bother to hide. She touched his lapel, whispering something that made him throw his head back and laugh. I stood by a marble pillar, sipping sparkling water, watching them. I was the invisible woman, the wife in the gray dress, the obstacle. Quite a spectacle, isn't it? I turned to see a man standing beside me. He was tall, with silver hair swept back from a forehead that looked like a cliff face. He had the kind of eyes that had seen everything and bought half of it. Robert Sterling, the architect of my current misery. Mr. Sterling, I said, offering a polite nod. It is a very impressive turnout. He looked at me, his gaze sliding over me with the indifference one reserves for hotel furniture. And you are? Eleanor Bexley, Marcus's wife. Ah, he said, his tone dropping a few degrees. The wife. Marcus speaks well of you. He says you are very supportive of his long hours. It was a code. He says you are stupid enough to believe his lies. I try to be understanding, I replied. Success requires sacrifice, does it not? Indeed, Robert said, taking a sip of his scotch. Sacrifice is the currency of empire. Mrs. Bexley, some people understand that. Others cling to things they should let go of. Before I could respond, a shrill voice cut through the air. Daddy, there you are! Tiffany materialized beside us, hooking her arm through her father's. She looked at me, and her smile sharpened into a blade. "And look who you found," she cooed, her voice pitched loud enough to turn heads. "Eleanor, I see you decided to come out of your library. Did you get lost on the way to the buffet?" A small circle of guests began to form around us. Sensing the drama like sharks sensing blood in the water, Marcus hurried over, looking nervous, caught between his wife, his mistress, and his boss. "Tiffany," Marcus warned, his voice low. "Oh, relax, Marcus." Tiffany waved him off. She turned to the crowd, her eyes gleaming. "Everyone, you have to meet Eleanor. She is quite the businesswoman. She owns a very exclusive property right in the middle of our new project, a lovely little patch of dirt and rusty metal." A ripple of polite, confused laughter went through the group. "She calls it an investment," Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "She thinks she is going to retire on it. I told her to sell it and buy a nice purse, but she says she wants to grow vegetables. Can you imagine? A vegetable garden in the middle of an industrial zone?" The laughter grew louder, less polite this time. I saw smirks. I saw rolled eyes. I saw Marcus looking at his shoes, refusing to defend me. "A vegetable garden?" a woman in diamonds asked, giggling. "Oh, that is precious. It is tragic. Really," Tiffany sighed dramatically. "Holding on to a piece of trash because you don't understand how the real world works. It is embarrassing." Robert Sterling looked down at me, his expression shifting from indifference to pity. It was the look a human gives to a limping dog before putting it down. "My daughter has a sharp tongue, Mrs. Bexley," Robert said, his voice booming with authority. "But she has a point. In business, as in life, sentimentality is a weakness. Sometimes, letting go is the best thing you can do. Holding on to the past only makes you look foolish." The circle fell silent, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the wife to crumble, to cry, to run away. I looked at Robert Sterling. I looked at Tiffany, preening in her red dress. I looked at Marcus, the coward. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "You are right, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "Letting go is often necessary, but I have found that in business, as in life, holding on to the right thing, at exactly the right moment, is not foolishness. It is leverage." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't expected that. Tiffany scoffed. "Leverage? Please, you wouldn't know leverage if it hit you in the face." She took a step closer, raising her glass. "To Eleanor," she mocked, "and her imaginary empire of dirt." She tilted her glass. It happened in slow motion. The champagne cascaded over the rim, splashing directly onto the bodice of my gray silk dress. The cold liquid soaked through instantly, leaving a dark, jagged stain across my chest. "Oh no," Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a performance that wouldn't have convinced a toddler. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. Eleanor, I guess I just slipped." The crowd gasped. I stood there, the wet silk clinging to my skin. I did not flinch. I did not wipe it off. Marcus stepped forward then, but instead of offering me a napkin, instead of reprimanding her, he looked at me with annoyance. "For God's sake, Eleanor," he hissed. "You shouldn't have been standing so close. You are always in the way. Go clean yourself up. You look like a mess." That was it, the final straw. The final distinct moment where the last ember of affection I held for him turned to ash. "You are right, Marcus," I said softly. "I am a mess. I should go." I turned and walked away. I heard Tiffany giggling behind me. "Poor thing. She really doesn't belong here, does she?" I walked out of the ballroom, head high, ignoring the stairs. I walked down the corridor to the ladies' powder room. It was empty. I looked at myself in the mirror. The stain was ugly. My face was pale, but my eyes were dry. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I dialed Arthur. "Eleanor?" he answered on the first ring. How is the party? The party is over, I said. My voice was ice. Execute the freeze. Are you sure? Arthur asked. Once we do this, the nuclear option is on the table. I want you to send a formal cease and desist to the Sterling Corporation tonight, I commanded. Inform them that Veritas Holdings has discovered potential environmental irregularities on Lot 49B that require an independent survey that will freeze any permit applications for at least 6 months. And Arthur? Yes? Reject the $55,000 offer. Tell them the price has changed. What is the new price? $10 million, I said, for a 2-year lease, non-negotiable. And tell them the chairman of Veritas Holdings demands a face-to-face meeting with Robert Sterling to discuss the terms of his surrender. 10 million? Arthur whistled. They will choke. Let them choke, I said. And Arthur? Make sure the courier delivers the notice tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I want it on Robert's desk before he finishes his first coffee. Done, Arthur said. Good hunting. Eleanor. I hung up. I looked at the stain on my dress one last time. I didn't try to clean it. I grabbed a paper towel, wrote for the dry cleaning on it, and left it on the counter. I walked out of the hotel, hailed a cab, and went home. When Marcus came in at 3 a.m, smelling of Tiffany and Triumph, I was already asleep, or pretending to be. The next morning, the bomb detonated. I was in the kitchen, making coffee. When Marcus's phone rang, it was 7:30. He groaned, fumbled for it on the counter, and answered. Hello? Yeah, this is Marcus. He listened for a moment. His face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might faint. What? Who? Veritas Holdings? No, that's impossible. We have the permits lined up. What do you mean they blocked the easement? He looked at me. I was buttering toast, humming a little tune. Yes, Mr. Sterling. I don't know who owns it. Tiffany said it was just some old lady. Yes, sir. I'm coming in right now. He hung up. His hands were shaking. What is wrong, honey? I asked, taking a bite of toast. Big problem, he stammered, grabbing his jacket. Huge problem. Some company called Veritas just slapped an injunction on the Skyline site. They blocked the power lines. The whole project is dead in the water if we don't fix this. Oh dear, I said. That sounds stressful. Maybe Tiffany can handle it. She is so good at leverage. He didn't even hear me. He ran out the door. By noon, the chaos had spread. I monitored the situation from my laptop in the library. The news had leaked to the business blogs. Skyline. Nova halted. Mystery landlord. Blockade Sterling's billion-dollar baby. Stock plunge. Sterling Corp shares dip 4% on infrastructure delays. At the Sterling headquarters, the scene was apparently apocalyptic. I knew this because Marcus sent me a text at 2 o'clock. Won't be home for dinner. Crisis mode. Tiffany is in big trouble. I smiled. According to the reports I was getting from Arthur, who had spies everywhere. Robert Sterling had dragged Tiffany into his office and screamed so loud, the secretary 3 doors down had hidden under her desk. He had thrown the Veritas file at her. You told me it was an old woman, he had roared. You told me it was a vegetable garden. Does an old woman hire the most expensive law firm in Chicago to serve me a $10 million extortion note? Does a vegetable garden come with a sophisticated corporate structure that owns every access road for 3 miles? Tiffany had tried to stammer an excuse. But she is. She is just a housewife. She must have hired someone. She? Robert yelled. This isn't a she, you idiot. This is a holding company. You were played. You underestimated the asset, and now we are bleeding $200,000 a day in interest payments. He had slammed his fist on the desk. Fix this, Tiffany. Find out who is behind Veritas. I don't care if you have to sleep in the archives. Find me a name. If we don't get that land, the bank pulls the loan on Friday. Do you understand? We will be insolvent. Tiffany had fled the office in tears, vowing to destroy whoever was doing this. Back in my quiet library, I watched the stock ticker on my screen. Sterling Corp was down another 2 points. I took a sip of tea. "You want a name, Tiffany?" I whispered to the screen. "You will get a name, but not until I'm sitting at the head of your father's table." I picked up my phone and sent a text to Arthur. "Set the meeting. Friday morning, 10 a.m. Tell them to bring the checkbook." The trap was not just sprung, it had crushed their legs. Now, all I had to do was walk in and finish them off. The hunt for the owner of Veritas Holdings was less of a strategic operation and more of a high-speed collision with a reinforced concrete wall. For the next 72 hours, the Sterling Corporation headquarters transformed into a war room. Robert Sterling, a man accustomed to having the world on speed dial, found himself screaming into a void that refused to answer back. He mobilized the most expensive legal sharks in Chicago, a team of forensic accountants, and private investigators who charged $500 an hour just to breathe. Their mandate was simple: find the human being behind the corporate veil, find the pressure point, find the weakness. They found nothing. I sat in my library, sipping Earl Grey tea, watching the chaos unfold via the encrypted updates Arthur sent to my tablet. It was a masterclass in corporate obfuscation, a structure I had designed 15 years ago to protect my privacy and my assets. The investigators hit the first layer. Veritas Holdings was registered in Delaware, a standard move, but when they peeled that back to find the registered agent, it led them to a holding firm in the Cayman Islands. That firm was owned by a trust in Liechtenstein, which in turn was managed by a blind foundation in Singapore. It was a Russian nesting doll of legal entities, each one perfectly compliant, perfectly opaque, and perfectly dead-ended. There were no names, no phone numbers, no email addresses other than the generic secure server that Arthur managed. I could imagine the scene in Robert's office, the veins throbbing in his forehead, the piles of useless dossiers, the realization that for the first time in his life, his money could not buy him a name. Tiffany, of course, was spiraling. Her arrogance was cracking under the pressure of her father's fury. She was desperate to find a scapegoat. On Wednesday evening, while Marcus was pacing the living room floor, chewing his fingernails down to the quick, Tiffany called him. He put it on speakerphone, too distracted to care that I was sitting on the sofa reading a magazine. "It has to be a competitor. Marcus?" Tiffany's voice was shrill, distorted by the phone's speaker. "It has to be Davidson Development, or maybe the Grim Reapers from Vanguard. Who else would know about the infrastructure bottleneck? Who else would have the capital to buy up the surrounding access roads overnight?" "We checked Davidson," Marcus replied, his voice weary. "They are clean." "They are just as confused as we are. They actually called Robert to ask if he wanted to sell the project right since we are stuck." "Damn it!" Tiffany screeched. "Then who is it? Who hates us this much?" There was a pause, a silence that stretched for 5 long seconds. "Marcus," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a suspicious whisper, You don't think it could be her, do you?" "Who?" "Eleanor, your wife." My heart did not skip a beat. I turned the page of my magazine, the paper making a crisp sound in the quiet room. Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Eleanor, are you high? Tiffany, look at her. She is currently reading House and Garden. She thinks an asset is something you put on a shelf. She doesn't even know how to log into our online banking without asking me for the password." "But she said that thing," Tiffany insisted, though her voice wavered. "At the party, about leverage, and the vegetable garden comment. She was parroting something she read in a book," Marcus said dismissively. "Eleanor is simple, Tiff. She is a sweet, boring, simple woman. She doesn't have the brains for a hostile land grab, and she definitely doesn't have the money. I control the finances. I would know if she moved $10 million. "I guess you're right," Tiffany sighed, the suspicion vanishing as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by her innate superiority complex. "She is too weak. She let me spill wine on her and just walked away. A woman like that doesn't have the stomach for war. It must be someone else. Someone dangerous." I smiled behind my magazine. They were looking for a wolf. They did not realize the wolf was sitting on their sofa, wearing a cardigan, but Robert Sterling was not a man who gave up easily. If he could not find the owner, he would squeeze the proxy. Thursday morning, the pressure shifted to Marcus. Robert threatened to fire him, and worse, to blacklist him from the industry if he did not use his connection to the land to find a solution. Marcus came home at noon, wild-eyed and sweating. "I need to find the deed," he muttered, storming past me in the hallway. "There has to be a paper trail. There has to be a contact number for this management company." He tore into the library. I stood in the doorway, watching him. He was frantic. He pulled books off the shelves, shaking them as if hidden documents would fall out. He yanked open the drawers of my desk, dumping pens and glue pots onto the floor. He rifled through the stacks of restoration paper, his hands trembling. "Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice mild. "What are you doing? You are making a mess." "Shut up, Eleanor," he snapped, not looking at me. "I am looking for the file, the deed to the land. Where did you put it?" "I told you," I said calmly. "The management company has it. I don't keep legal documents here. I only keep books." "There has to be something," he yelled, kicking a pile of leather-bound journals. "A letter, a business card, anything." He ripped open the cabinet doors. He found recipes. He found knitting patterns. He found a half-finished crossword puzzle. He found exactly what I wanted him to find: the curated life of a boring housewife. He did not find the biometric safe behind the false panel in the encyclopedia section. He did not find the secure server key. He did not find the burner phone I used to call Arthur. After 20 minutes of destruction, Marcus collapsed into my reading chair, burying his face in his hands. "I am dead," he moaned. "If I don't fix this, Robert is going to kill me. The interest payments alone are bleeding the company dry. We are losing $200,000 a day. The investors are pulling out. The stock is tanking." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. It took every ounce of my self-control not to dig my nails in. "I am sure it will work out." "Marcus," I said, "maybe you should just pay them what they want." "We can't," he cried. "We don't even know who they are. They won't talk to us. They just keep sending legal injunctions." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tiffany. "Daddy caved. He is replying to the Veritas lawyer. We are agreeing to the meeting." Marcus looked up, hope dawning in his eyes. "They are setting a meeting. Robert is going to negotiate." The machinery of my plan clicked into its final gear. Arthur had sent the terms an hour ago. We demanded a face-to-face meeting at the offices of Arthur Partners on Friday morning at 10 o'clock sharp, and we had one specific condition. The attendees must include Robert Sterling, CEO, Tiffany Sterling, VP of Acquisitions, and Marcus Bexley, project lead. No proxies, no lawyers standing in for the principals. Robert had no choice. The bleeding was too severe. He had to stop the hemorrhaging before the markets closed on Friday. That evening, the mood in the house was strange. Marcus was manic, alternating between relief and terror. "We are going to crush them," he told me over dinner, trying to convince himself. "Robert is going to walk into that room and intimidate whoever this is. He's going to buy them out, and then we will be back on track. Tiffany says we just need to throw enough money at them." "I am sure Tiffany knows best," I said, cutting my steak with precision. "She does," Marcus nodded. "She is a shark, She is not like well. She understands how the world works." "I bet she does," I murmured. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The city was gray and cold, but inside my chest, a fire was burning. I woke up at 6. Marcus was already up, pacing the bedroom, rehearsing his lines for the meeting. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one I had bought him for his promotion last year. He looked the part of the successful executive, but I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sour sweat and desperate cologne. "I have a big day," he told me, not looking at me. "Huge meeting, Might be late. I have a busy day too, I said, sitting at my vanity. Oh? He glanced at me in the mirror, distracted. Library stuff? No, I said, applying a layer of red lipstick, a shade I had not worn in 15 years. The shade was called Victory Red. I am going to the spa. I booked a full-day package, massage, facial, the works. I feel like I need to shed my old skin. Marcus exhaled, a visible wave of relief washing over him. He was terrified that I might ask to come with him, or that I would cause a scene, or that he would have to explain to me what was happening. The thought of me safely tucked away in a spa, wrapped in a robe and cucumbers, was exactly what he wanted. That is great, honey, he said, actually smiling. You deserve it. Relax. Take the whole day. Don't worry about dinner. He kissed the top of my head. Wish me luck. Good luck, Marcus, I said, meeting his eyes in the reflection. You are going to need it. He left. I heard the front door close. I waited 5 minutes. Then, I stood up. I walked to the back of my closet, past the beige cardigans and the sensible floral dresses. I reached for the garment bag I had brought home yesterday, hidden under a pile of winter coats. I unzipped it. Inside was a suit I had commissioned from a tailor in London 2 weeks ago, paid for through the Veritas account. It was not a housewife's suit. It was a weapon. It was black Italian wool, sharp-shouldered, tailored to within an inch of its life. The trousers were wide-legged and authoritative. The jacket was cut to intimidate. I put it on. It fit like a second skin, or rather, it fit like my first skin, the one I had shed to marry Marcus. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek chignon. I put on gold stiletto heels that clicked against the floor like the ticking of a bomb. I put on a pair of diamond stud earrings that I had bought for myself with my first bonus check 15 years ago. I looked in the mirror. Eleanor the librarian was gone. The silence was back. I grabbed my briefcase, a vintage Hermes leather case that had seen more boardroom slaughters than Robert Sterling had seen hot dinners. I walked downstairs. I did not take my family car. A black town car was waiting for me at the curb, sent by Arthur. The driver opened the door. Good morning, Ms. Bexley. To the offices of Arthur Partners? Yes, I said, sliding into the leather seat. And please, drive fast. I do not want to keep my husband waiting. As the car wove through the Chicago traffic, I watched the city pass by. I looked at the skyscrapers, the monuments to male ego and steel. Robert Sterling thought he owned this city. Tiffany Sterling thought she could inherit it. Marcus thought he could bluff his way through it. They were about to learn that the city has a basement, and the basement is where the foundation is poured. I checked my watch. It was 9:45. At Arthur's office. They would be arriving now. They would be ushered into the conference room. They would be nervous. They would be expecting a shark, a rival CEO, perhaps a foreign investor. They were expecting anyone but me. I checked my phone. One last text from Arthur. The fish are in the net, waiting for the fishermen. I put the phone away. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The conference room at Arthur Partners was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended 40 stories above the street, with a view of the Chicago skyline that usually made men feel like gods. Today, however, it made the 3 people sitting around the mahogany table look small. I was not in the room yet. I was standing in the antechamber, watching them through the one-way glass panel that Arthur had installed for moments exactly like this. It was theater, pure and simple, and I was the director, inside. Robert Sterling was pacing. For a man who built skyscrapers, he looked like he was about to crumble. He kept checking his watch, a heavy platinum piece that probably cost more than my father's house. He tugged at his collar. He was sweating. It was a cold sweat, the kind that comes when you realize your money has stopped working. Tiffany sat to his right, drumming her manicured fingernails on the polished wood. Click, click, click. She looked annoyed rather than afraid. In her world, problems were just delays that could be yelled at until they moved. This is ridiculous. Daddy, she complained, her voice muffled but audible through the glass. "It is 10 past 10. Who do these people think they are? We are the Sterling Corporation. We do not wait for landlords. They wait for us." "Shut up, Tiffany," Robert snapped, not breaking his stride. "Just shut up. This isn't a landlord. This is an assassin. You don't get an injunction this tight unless you have a war room of lawyers. We are bleeding. Do you understand? Every minute we sit here is costing us thousands in interest." Marcus sat at the far end of the table, as far away from Robert as he could get without leaving the room. He looked ill. His skin was the color of old parchment. He was staring at his phone, likely checking to see if I was enjoying my spa day. He had no idea that the wife he thought was getting a mud mask was currently standing 20 feet away, holding the detonator to his life. "I bet it is some hedge fund prick," Tiffany muttered, pulling a compact mirror out of her bag to check her lipstick. "Some guy with a Napoleon complex who wants to feel important. I am going to tear him apart when he walks in. I will offer him half of what he wants and tell him to choke on it." "You will do no such thing," Robert hissed, stopping his pacing and leaning over her. "You will sit there. You will shut your mouth. And you will let me handle this. You have done enough damage with your vegetable garden intel. If this deal goes south, Tiffany, do not think your last name will save you. I will fire you before we hit the lobby." Tiffany's mouth snapped shut, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't used to consequences. Beside me. Arthur checked his pocket watch. He was smiling. It was a wolfish grin. "Showtime. Eleanor," he whispered. "Are you ready?" I adjusted the lapel of my black Italian wool blazer. I ran a thumb over the leather handle of my briefcase. I felt a calm so profound it was almost narcotic. "I was born ready. Arthur, open the door." Arthur nodded and pushed open the heavy double oak doors. We entered. Arthur went first, his stride purposeful and heavy. I followed a step behind, but I did not look at them. I had my phone pressed to my ear, my back slightly turned to the room as I walked in. I was speaking in rapid, flawless French, a language Marcus knew I had studied in college but assumed I had forgotten years ago. "Non, vendez tout. La position asiatique est compromise. Je veux une liquidation totale avant l'ouverture des marchés. Oui, maintenant. No. Sell everything. The Asian position is compromised. I want a total liquidation before the markets open. Yes, now." I snapped the phone shut and dropped it into my pocket. The room was silent. I turned around. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Marcus was the first to move. He didn't just stand. He shot up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted. His chair scraped violently against the floorboards, a harsh screech that tore through the silence. "Eleanor?" His voice was a mix of confusion, horror, and sheer disbelief. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if he were seeing a hallucination. He looked at my suit, the sharp tailoring, the power shoulders. He looked at my hair, pulled back in that severe, commanding chignon. He looked at the diamonds in my ears, but mostly, he looked at my face. He didn't recognize the expression. He was looking for the soft, compliant wife who asked him what he wanted for dinner. Instead, he found a stranger with eyes like flint. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, taking a stumbling step toward me. "Eleanor, are you lost? The spa is on the other side of town. Did you follow me?" Tiffany let out a short, incredulous laugh. She didn't stand up. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her face twisting into a sneer of pure contempt. "Oh my God," she groaned, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "You have got to be kidding me. She actually followed him, Marcus. I told you she was obsessed. This is pathetic." She looked at me, her gaze raking over my outfit. "Nice suit, Eleanor," she mocked. "Did you rent it for the day? Playing dress-up to impress the big kids? Listen, sweetie, this is a closed meeting. Serious business. We are waiting for the owner of a multi-million-dollar company, not a housewife who got lost on her way to a massage. Go wait in the car. Marcus will deal with your insecurity later." Robert Sterling did not laugh. He did not speak. He was standing by the window, his hand frozen halfway to his tie. His eyes were locked on me. He was squinting slightly, his head tilted to the side, processing the visual data. He was a predator, and predators recognize other apex animals. He saw the way I stood. He saw the lack of fidgeting. He saw the victory red lipstick. I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. A memory from 15 years ago. Struggling to surface through the fog of time and whiskey, he felt the atmosphere in the room shift, the air pressure dropping as if a storm front had just rolled in. I did not answer Marcus. I did not look at Tiffany. To acknowledge her insult would be to give it value. I walked past Marcus. I could smell him, the sweat, the fear, and the lingering scent of Tiffany's perfume. He reached out a hand to grab my arm, a reflex to control me. "Eleanor, seriously, you need to leave right now before Robert gets angry." I didn't break stride. I simply shifted my briefcase, blocking his hand with a sharp, hard movement. I didn't even look at him. I treated him like a piece of furniture I had to navigate around. I walked straight to the head of the table. The chair at the head of the table is a symbol. In every boardroom in the world, that chair belongs to the person with the most power. It was the chair Robert Sterling had been eyeing before we walked in. I placed my hand on the leather backrest. I pulled it out. The sound was smooth, heavy, deliberate. "Eleanor!" Tiffany barked, losing her patience. "Are you deaf? Get out. You are embarrassing yourself. Daddy, tell security to throw her out." I sat down. I settled into the leather, crossing my legs slowly. I placed my briefcase on the table in front of me. I clasped my hands together and rested them on the mahogany. I looked down the length of the table, first at Marcus, who was standing with his mouth open, then at Tiffany, whose face was turning a blotchy red, and finally at Robert. Robert's face had gone pale. The memory had surfaced. "Mr. Penhaligon," I said. My voice was low, modulated, and completely devoid of the warmth I had used for 10 years. It was the voice of the silence. "Please begin." Arthur stepped forward. He stood next to my chair, like a guard dog, beaming with malicious delight. "Mr. Sterling? Ms. Sterling? Mr. Bexley," Arthur said, his voice booming off the glass walls. "Please take your seats." "I am not sitting down until this crazy woman leaves," Tiffany shrieked, standing up now. "This is insane. Who do you think you are?" "Sit down, Tiffany," Robert whispered. It was a strangled sound. "But Daddy—" "I said sit down," Robert roared, slamming his hand on the table. The force of it made the water glasses jump. Tiffany collapsed back into her chair. Shocked into silence, Marcus slowly sank into his seat, his eyes never leaving my face. He looked like a man watching a car crash in slow motion. Arthur cleared his throat. He gestured to me with an open palm. "Gentlemen, and Ms. Sterling," Arthur announced, savoring every syllable. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to my client." He paused for effect. "Please meet the sole proprietor of Veritas Holdings, the owner of Lot 49B, the entirety of the surrounding access roads, and the holder of the infrastructure rights for Sector 4. Arthur smiled. "This is the person who holds your project in the palm of her hand. This is Mrs. Eleanor Bexley." The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 3 realities shattering simultaneously. Tiffany's jaw literally dropped. Her mouth hung open in a grotesque O of stupidity. Her eyes darted from Arthur to me, then back to Arthur, desperate for this to be a joke. "No," she whispered. "No, that is not possible. She is a librarian." Marcus looked like he had been shot in the gut. He slumped in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He stared at me, his brain trying to reconcile the woman who made his coffee with the woman who had just checkmated his career. "Eleanor?" he rasped. You? You own Veritas?" I didn't answer him. I looked at Robert. Robert Sterling slowly sat down. He moved like an old man. He looked at me, and I saw the fear, Genuine, unadulterated fear. He knew what Veritas meant now. He knew what the name implied. Truth. The silence, Robert murmured. It was barely a whisper, but in the dead quiet of the room, it sounded like a scream. I smiled. It was a cold, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Good morning, Robert," I said. "It has been a long time. I believe you have met my husband and his assistant?" I let the word assistant hang in the air. Dripping with venom, Tiffany flinched as if I had slapped her. "This is a trick," Tiffany stammered, her voice rising in hysteria. "This is fraud. You stole those deeds. You couldn't afford that land. Marcus handles the money. You are broke. You are a nobody." I reached into my briefcase. I did not hurry. Every movement was calculated to torture them. I pulled out a single, thick document. It was the original deed, stamped with the city seal. Dated 10 years ago, I slid it across the polished table. It spun slowly, coming to a stop directly in front of Robert. "Read it," I commanded. Robert didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him at the party, he looked at me with respect. The terrified respect of a man who realizes he has walked into a tiger's cage thinking it was a petting zoo. "I don't need to read it," Robert said hoarsely. "I remember the signature. I remember the style. You dismantled Dalloway Steel in 2005. You are Eleanor V. Bexley." "I am," I said. But Marcus's voice broke. He looked at me with tears welling in his eyes. Tears of self-pity, not remorse. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide it? We are married. Eleanor, everything we have is shared." I laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. "Shared?" I repeated. "Like the $10,000 you withdrew from our shared account to pay for Tiffany's signing bonus? Like the rent you pay for her apartment in the Gold Coast? Or perhaps you mean shared, like the way you shared our bed with her while I was at home?" Marcus turned white. Tiffany gasped. "Oh, don't look so surprised," I said, leaning forward. "Did you really think I was just sitting in my library gluing paper together? I was auditing you. Marcus, I have every bank statement, every text message, every credit card receipt. I know about the diamond bracelet. I know about the weekend in Aspen. I know everything." I turned my gaze to Tiffany. She was trembling now, her arrogance stripping away to reveal the frightened child underneath. "And you," I said softly, "you called my investment a junkyard. You told me to sell it and buy a purse. You said your father only cares for prime locations." I tapped the table with my index finger. "Well, Tiffany, you are sitting at the table now, and the woman with the small investment is holding the knife. So, tell me, how much is my vegetable garden worth to you today?" Tiffany opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at her father for help, but Robert Sterling was staring at his hands, defeated. $10 million, Robert said quietly. That was the demand. "That was the price yesterday," I corrected him. "Today, the price has gone up." "Up?" Robert looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "How much?" "We will get to the money," I said, sitting back in my chair. "But first, we are going to talk about personnel changes, because frankly, Robert, I am not impressed with your management team." I looked at Marcus. I looked at the man I had vowed to love and cherish. The man who had called me boring. The man who had betrayed me for a younger model. "I think," I said, "it is time for some layoffs." "Impossible!" The shriek tore through the sophisticated silence of the conference room. Bouncing off the glass walls like a trapped bird, Tiffany Sterling had finally snapped. The reality I had presented was too large, too jagged for her narrow, privileged mind to swallow, so she simply rejected it. She stood up, her chair toppling backward with a crash, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate denial. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her hand shaking so violently that her diamond bracelet rattled against her wrist. "You are lying! You are a liar!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is a joke A sick, twisted joke. Look at her. Daddy, she is a nobody. She spends her days gluing old paper together in a dusty attic. She coupons for groceries. She does not own a holding company. She turned to Arthur, her eyes wild. And you are a fraud. I bet she paid you to print up these fake papers. This is forgery. This is corporate espionage. Daddy, call the police. Have them arrested. Get this crazy woman out of here before I drag her out myself. Marcus reached out, trying to grab Tiffany's arm, looking terrified. Tiffany, stop. Please. Don't touch me, she yelled, slapping his hand away. You are just as stupid as she is if you believe this. She is trying to scam us. She probably wants a settlement check so she can run away. I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let her scream. I let her pour all her fear and inadequacy into the room until the air was thick with it. Then, I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out the master file. It was a heavy binder, bound in black leather, containing the original articles of incorporation for Veritas Holdings, the chain of title for the land, and the bank certifications for the liquid assets backing the company. It was thick, dense, and undeniable. I lifted it 6 inches off the table and let it drop. Thwack! The sound was not loud. But in the sudden silence following Tiffany's outburst, it sounded like a gunshot. It was the sound of a judge's gavel, the sound of a guillotine blade hitting the block. The police are not necessary. Tiffany, I said, my voice calm and deadly level. But if you would like to call them, I can have them verify the fraud statutes regarding the falsification of environmental reports. I believe the penalty is 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Shall I dial the number for you? Tiffany froze, her mouth open, the breath hitching in her throat. I slid the black binder toward Robert. Open it, Robert, I commanded. Robert Sterling stared at the black leather as if it were a venomous snake. His face was gray. The sweat on his forehead had gathered into droplets that threatened to run down into his eyes. He reached out a hand that trembled visibly. The great lion of Chicago real estate was shaking. He opened the cover. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. He turned the page, the paper crinkling loudly. He stopped. His eyes widened. He leaned in closer, squinting, as if he could not believe what the ink was telling him. Eleanor V. Bexley, he read aloud. His voice was hollow. He looked up at me. His eyes searched my face, peeling away the layers of the last 10 years, looking past the librarian, past the housewife, past the woman he had dismissed as furniture at his party. He saw the bone structure. He saw the cold intelligence in the eyes. And then, the memory hit him. I saw it happen. I saw the color drain completely from his face. 15 years ago, New York City. The merger of the First National Bank and the sovereign wealth fund of a small European nation. It was a deal worth $4 billion. Robert had been representing the bank, arrogant, blustering, sure of his victory. He had walked into that negotiation thinking he would steamroll the opposition, and across the table, there had been a 23-year-old analyst, a woman who barely spoke, a woman who sat in silence for 3 hours while he lectured and postured. And then, when he was finished, she had slid a single sheet of paper across the table that exposed a hidden debt structure in his proposal that rendered his entire position illegal. She had destroyed him with one piece of paper and zero emotion. He had never known her first name. Everyone just called her by the nickname the trading floor had given her. Robert slowly pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, a sound of retreat. He stood up. He did not shout. He did not bluster. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his jacket, and then, to the absolute horror of his daughter and my husband, he bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture of submission, a gesture of profound, terrified respect. "Madam Chairwoman," Robert said. His voice shook, but the title was clear. Tiffany let out a strangled gasp. "What? Daddy?" Robert ignored her. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "I did not know," Robert stammered. "I had heard rumors that you had retired. that you had vanished. I never made the connection. Bexley, of course. You took his name. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I apologize, Madam Chairwoman. If I had known who was sitting on the other side of that land deed, I never would have. We never would have insulted you with such a low offer. I remember New York. I remember what you did to the Dalloway cartel. I remember the silence. The nickname hung in the air like smoke. Marcus was staring at Robert with his mouth agape. He looked like a fish that had been pulled out of the water and clubbed. The silence? Marcus whispered. Robert, what are you talking about? Who is she? She is Eleanor. She makes pot roast. She restores books. Dad, have you lost your mind? Tiffany screeched, finding her voice again. Stop bowing to her. She is a housewife. She is a nobody. She is scamming us. Robert turned on his daughter with a ferocity that made her recoil. Shut your mouth, he roared. The vein in his neck bulged. You stupid, arrogant little girl. Do you have any idea who you are standing in front of? He pointed a shaking finger at me. This is not a housewife. This is the woman who orchestrated the hostile takeover of Midwest Grain before you were even in middle school. This is the only person in this city who has the liquidity and the connections to have our credit lines cut within an hour. If she picks up that phone, Tiffany, the bank calls our loans. We are bankrupt by lunch. Do you understand me? We are finished. Tiffany shrank back, her eyes huge, looking from her father to me with a dawning, terrifying realization. The world she understood, a world where money bought power and she had the most money, was crumbling. She was looking at a creature she did not know existed, a woman who had more power than her father. Marcus turned to me. His face was a mask of pure shock and betrayal. He looked at the suit I was wearing, the way I sat at the head of the table, the deference Robert Sterling was showing me. Eleanor, he squeaked. I turned my gaze to him. I did not soften. Hello, Marcus, I said. I don't understand, he said, shaking his head. You were a risk analyst? A corporate raider? Why didn't you tell me? All these years I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was the one taking care of things. You were never protecting me. Marcus, I said coolly, you were underestimating me. There is a difference. But I am your husband, he cried, his voice rising in a pathetic plea. We are partners. Why would you hide this? Why would you let me think you were just a decorator? I supplied. Just a prop for your arm at parties? Just a safe, boring woman who would never challenge you? I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. I hid it because I wanted peace. Marcus, I wanted a life where I didn't have to destroy people for a living. I wanted to be soft. I wanted to trust someone to carry the load for a while. I gave you the chance to be the man you said you wanted to be. I looked over at Tiffany, who was now crying silently, her mascara running down her cheeks. And you used that trust to bankrupt our marriage, I continued. You used the safety I gave you to build a playground for your ego and your mistress. No, Eleanor. Wait, Marcus stammered, standing up and reaching across the table. It's not like that. I messed up, okay? I admit it, but we can fix this. We are a team. Imagine what we can do now. You and me, with your experience and my connections. We can rule this city. Darling, please, we are husband and wife. I let him finish. I let the desperation hang in the air. Then I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Husband and wife? I repeated, tasting the words as if they were spoiled milk. I stood up slowly. I towered over him, even across the table. Which wife are you speaking to? Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. Are you appealing to the wife you lied to every night for 6 months? The wife whose savings you stole to pay for her apartment? I pointed at Tiffany without looking at her. Or are you appealing to the wife you plan to rob? Because let's be clear, Marcus, you weren't just cheating on me. You were conspiring to defraud me of my property to further your own career. You tried to force me to sell my asset for pennies so you could get a promotion from her father." Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "That is not marriage, Marcus," I said. "That is a hostile takeover, and you failed." I turned back to Robert. He was still standing, waiting for my command. "Sit down, Bob," I said, using the diminutive nickname he hated. "We have business to discuss. And frankly, your teaching methods regarding your daughter and your staff leave a lot to be desired. You have raised a fool and hired a thief." Robert sank into his chair, looking aged by 10 years in 10 minutes. "I admit, mistakes were made. Serious mistakes. Mistakes are when you spill coffee," I said, opening the file in front of me. "This was a calculated insult, and now you are going to pay the tuition for the lesson I am about to teach you." I looked at Tiffany. She was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. "Stop crying," I ordered. "It is unprofessional. If you want to play in the big leagues, Tiffany, learn to take a hit. You wanted to know what leverage looks like? Look at me." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "This is what leverage looks like," I said. "I own the ground you stand on. I own the lights that turn on in your office. And as of this moment, I own your future." I turned to Arthur. "Arthur, please distribute the settlement agreement. The new one, the one with the punitive damages clause." Arthur slid 3 thick documents across the table, one for Robert, one for Tiffany, one for Marcus. "Read it," I said, "and do not skim, because if you miss a single comma, it will cost you another $1 million. Marcus looked down at the paper. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it. "Eleanor," he whispered. "Please." "Madam Chairwoman," I corrected him. "You lost the right to call me Eleanor when you decided my name wasn't enough for you." I sat back, watching them read the terms of their own execution. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy. It was beautiful. It was mine. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was suffocating. I watched Marcus and Robert read the document Arthur had slid across the mahogany table. Their eyes darted back and forth across the pages, their pupils dilating as the magnitude of my demands sank in. Tiffany, wiping her eyes, tried to read over her father's shoulder, but he shoved her away with a roughness born of pure panic. "This is," Robert stammered, his voice hoarse, "this is extortion. Eleanor, you cannot be serious." "I am deadly serious, Robert," I replied, leaning back and tenting my fingers. "And let's correct your terminology. Extortion is a crime. This is a negotiation. You have a need, a desperate, existential need for my land to save your billion-dollar project. I have an asset, supply and demand, economics 101. "You want a lease?" Robert asked, looking at the clause I had highlighted. "You won't even sell it outright?" "Sell?" I laughed softly. "Why would I sell the goose that lays the golden eggs? No. Veritas Holdings will retain full ownership of Lot 49B and the surrounding access roads. We are offering you a 25-year lease." I pointed to the figure at the bottom of page 2. "The annual lease payment will be $2 million, adjusted annually for inflation at a rate of 5%, I stated calmly. "Furthermore, Veritas Holdings requires a controlling interest in the project's board of directors regarding any infrastructure decisions. Nothing gets dug, laid, or wired without my signature." Robert turned a shade of gray usually reserved for corpses. "That destroys our profit margin. It is bleeding us dry. Better to bleed than to die." "Robert," I said, "but the money is the easy part. Turn to page 4. Section, Personnel and Ethical Compliance." Robert flipped the page. Marcus followed suit. I saw Marcus's hands freeze. He stopped breathing. "Condition number 1, I recited from memory, my eyes locking onto my husband. "Immediate termination of the project lead, Mr. Marcus Bexley." "What?" Marcus dropped the contract. It fluttered to the table. "Eleanor, no, you can't do that. This is my career. This is my big break." "It was your career," I corrected him. The clause is standard. Marcus, gross misconduct, conflict of interest. You are sleeping with the daughter of the CEO while negotiating land rights for the company. You embezzled funds from your spouse to facilitate this affair. You are a liability. No insurance company in the world will cover a project run by a man who treats fiduciary duty like a suggestion. I looked at Robert. If you want that lease signed today, Robert, you fire him, right now, with cause, no severance, no golden parachute. He walks out of here with nothing but the suit on his back, which, incidentally, I paid for. Robert didn't hesitate, not for a second. He looked at Marcus with cold, dead eyes. You are fired, Bexley, Robert grunted. Pack your desk. Robert, Marcus gasped, standing up, his chair clattering behind him. You can't be serious. I did everything for you. I betrayed my wife for this project. And you failed, Robert said ruthlessly. You are useless to me. Sit down and shut up. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, looking like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Now, I continued, turning my gaze to the weeping woman beside him. Condition number 2. Tiffany looked up, her mascara smeared, her lips trembling. Ms. Tiffany Sterling is to be stripped of her title as Vice President of Acquisitions immediately, I said. She will be removed from any management role within Sterling Corporation. Furthermore, she will issue a full public apology to me, personally, to be published in the Chicago Tribune and the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning. The text of the apology is attached as Exhibit B. I am not doing that, Tiffany shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. I am not apologizing to you. You are a nobody. Daddy, tell her to go to hell. We can find another way. We can sue her. There is no other way, you stupid girl, Robert shouted, turning on her. We have no grounds to sue. She owns the land. She owns the roads. She has us in a chokehold. I don't care, Tiffany screamed, her face twisting into ugly lines of entitlement. I am a Sterling. I do not bow down to some frumpy housewife who thinks she is special because she learned a few big words. She is a bitch, Daddy. She is just a jealous, bitter old... Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud. Robert Sterling had backhanded his daughter across the face. The force of the blow knocked Tiffany sideways in her chair. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her hand flying to her cheek where a red welt was already rising. The room went deathly silent. One more word, Robert hissed, his voice trembling with rage. Just one more word out of you, and I will cut you out of the will completely. You have cost me millions. You have humiliated me. You will sign that apology, and you will vacate your office within the hour. Do you understand me? Tiffany stared at her father, shock replacing the anger in her eyes. She had never been hit. She had never been told no. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face, terrified into silence. Robert turned back to me, panting slightly. Done. She is out. He is fired. Now, do we have a deal? Almost, I said. We have dealt with the professional consequences. Now, we deal with the personal ones. I turned to Marcus. He was staring at the table, weeping silently. Marcus, I said. He looked up. His eyes were red, filled with a pathetic mixture of hope and fear. Eleanor, he choked out. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees on the plush carpet. He actually crawled toward me. Eleanor, please, I am so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I love you. You know I love you. He grabbed the edge of my blazer. I brushed his hand away as if it were a cockroach. Don't touch the suit, Marcus, I said coldly. It is Italian wool. Please, baby, he sobbed, ignoring me. It was her. It was Tiffany. She seduced me. She told me she could make me a star. I was weak. I am just a man. Eleanor, she threw herself at me. I never stopped loving you. I was going to break it off with her after the launch, I swear. You were going to break it off? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that why you were planning to move in with her next month? Is that why you told her I was dead weight? I never said that, Marcus lied, his eyes wide and earnest. I never spoke ill of you. I defended you. I told her you were a wonderful wife. I reached for my phone. I tapped the screen and connected it to the boardroom's Bluetooth system. Arthur, I said. Play Exhibit C. Arthur nodded and pressed a key on his laptop. Marcus's voice filled the room, loud and clear. It was crisp, high-quality audio, recorded from the microphone I had planted in his car 3 weeks ago. God, she is so boring. Tiff, it is like living with a ghost. Eleanor is just a useless old woman. She has no ambition. She sits there with her dusty books and her knitting. I can't wait to get rid of her. Once the bonus clears, I am filing the papers. I am trading up. Baby, you are the Ferrari. She is the minivan. The recording ended. Marcus knelt there, his mouth open, the lie dying in his throat. I looked down at him with absolute contempt. A minivan, I repeated. Interesting comparison, because this minivan just ran you over. I reached into my briefcase again. I filed for divorce this morning. Marcus, I said, on the grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance. And since you clearly never read our prenuptial agreement, the one my father insisted on and you signed without looking because you were so eager to get access to my trust fund, you might want to know about the infidelity clause. Marcus blinked. We have a prenup? We do, I said. And it states that in the event of proven adultery, the offending party forfeits all claims to marital assets. You get nothing. Marcus, you don't get the penthouse. You don't get the cars. You don't get the savings. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, your mediocrity. But I have debt, Marcus wailed. Eleanor, I have credit card bills. I have loans. If you take everything, how will I live? The debt, I said, smiling. I am glad you brought that up. I pulled out a final sheet of paper. You have been living quite the high life, Marcus. Dinners, hotels, jewelry, and you maxed out 3 black market credit cards to do it because you didn't want the charges showing up on our joint account. Very clever. Except those lenders get nervous when payments are late. I leaned in close. They were so nervous, in fact, that they were happy to sell the debt to a collection agency this morning for 40 cents on the dollar. That agency is a subsidiary of Veritas Holdings. Marcus went white. You bought my debt? I own you, Marcus, I whispered. I am your creditor, and I am not a lenient one. You owe me $150,000, and I expect a payment plan to be set up by Monday. If you miss a payment, I will garnish every paycheck you ever earn for the rest of your miserable life. Marcus slumped to the floor, defeated, broken, a hollow shell of a man. I stood up. Robert, I said, turning to the CEO who was watching this domestic demolition with horror. One last thing. Yes? Robert asked, his voice shaking. Whatever you want. The equity, I said. The lease is fine for cash flow, but I want security. Veritas Holdings requires a 20% equity stake in Sterling Corporation, not just the project, the parent company. 20%? Robert gasped. That is my controlling share. That makes you my partner. It makes me your boss, I corrected. Sign the transfer, Robert, or I walk out that door. I make a phone call, and I turn Lot 49B into a pig farm. Imagine the smell wafting up to your luxury penthouses. Imagine the headlines. Robert looked at the pen in his hand. He looked at his weeping daughter. He looked at his fired, broken prospective son-in-law. He looked at the skyline outside the window, the legacy he had built. He signed. He signed away 20% of his life's work with a stroke of a pen. He pushed the papers across the table. He looked old, defeated. Thank you, Robert, I said, sliding the documents into my briefcase. Pleasure doing business with you. I snapped the locks on the briefcase shut. Click, click. Now, I said. Get them out of my sight. Robert pressed the intercom button. Security, send a team to the conference room. Immediately. 2 minutes later, 4 burly guards entered. Escort Mr. Bexley and Miss Sterling to the exit, Robert commanded, not looking at them. Confiscate their badges. They are trespassing. No, Daddy, please, Tiffany screamed as a guard grabbed her arm. You can't do this. I am your daughter. Get her out, Robert roared. Tiffany began to kick and scream, flailing wildly. I will kill you, she shrieked at me. I will kill you, you witch. This isn't over. It was over before you even started. Honey, I said calmly. They dragged her out, her heels scraping across the floor, her screams echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors shut. Marcus didn't scream. He let them lift him up. He looked at me one last time, tears streaming down his face. Eleanor. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. The guards hauled him out. The room was quiet again, just me, Arthur, and a broken billionaire. I adjusted my cuffs. I checked my watch. 11 o'clock. Well, I said, turning to Arthur. That went well? Did you get the signature on the equity transfer notarized? Already done electronically. Arthur grinned. You own 20% of the city. I looked at Robert Sterling. He was staring out the window, looking at the gray sky. Mr. Sterling, I said. He turned slowly. I expect the first lease payment by close of business today, I said. And Robert, next time you want to build something, check the ground first. You never know what is buried there. I picked up my briefcase. Meeting adjourned, I said. I have to go. I have a shipment of rare books arriving at noon, and unlike this company, my library runs on a schedule. I walked out of the glass cage, my heels clicking a rhythm of absolute victory on the marble floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. Ruins. And from those ruins, my garden would grow. 30 days. That is how long it takes for the concrete of a foundation to cure properly. It is a chemical process where water and cement bind together, hardening into a structure capable of supporting immense weight. It is also, coincidentally, exactly how long it took for the landscape of my life to settle into its new, unshakable configuration. The Skyline Nova project broke ground on a crisp Monday morning in December. The sound of pile drivers echoing through the West Side Industrial District was no longer a noise that kept me awake with worry. Now, it was the sound of my bank account growing. Every thud of the hammer, every beep of a reversing bulldozer, every ton of steel delivered to the site represented a percentage point of profit flowing directly into the coffers of Veritas Holdings. I visited the site 1 week after construction began. I did not wear a hard hat or a safety vest. I stood on the observation deck of the temporary field office, an office I had contractually obligated Sterling Corporation to build for me. Robert Sterling stood beside me. In just 4 weeks, the man had aged 10 years. His posture, once the aggressive stance of a lion, was now slumped, his shoulders burdened by the invisible weight of the equity he had signed away. He looked tired. The vibrant silver of his hair seemed dull, and the lines around his mouth were etched deep with humiliation. The pylons are being driven into the bedrock of Lot 49B today, Robert said, his voice lacking its usual boom. He held out a clipboard with the daily progress report. He did not shove it at me. He offered it with 2 hands. We are on schedule. Madam Chairwoman, pending your approval of the overtime budget. I took the clipboard. I scanned the figures. They were efficient. He was learning. The overtime is approved. Robert, I said, signing the bottom of the page. But remind the site foreman that if the noise decibels exceed the city ordinance after 10 at night, the fines come out of his bonus, not my dividends. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Robert said. He swallowed hard. I will inform him immediately. He turned to leave, but hesitated. Is there anything else? I asked, not looking up from the report. It is about Tiffany, Robert mumbled, staring at his shoes. She called me yesterday. She is having a hard time. The hotel shift work is difficult for her. She asked if she could perhaps come back to the company, in a junior role, mailroom, even. I looked at him. I saw a father trying to bargain for his child. It was almost touching, in a pathetic sort of way. The agreement was clear. "Robert," I said softly. "She learns the value of $1. She learns what it feels like to be the person serving the coffee, not the one throwing it. How long has she been working at the motel?" 3 weeks, he sighed. "Then she has barely finished orientation," I said. "Let her stay. It builds character. And frankly, Robert, she needs a lot of construction." Robert nodded, defeated. "Understood." He walked away to relay the bad news. I felt no guilt. I had heard reports of Tiffany's new life. She was working the front desk at the Starlight Inn, a 2-star motel near the airport. It was a place where the carpet smelled of stale smoke and the ice machine was permanently broken. My sources told me she had sold her entire collection of Birkin bags to pay off her credit card debt. Realizing too late that a $20,000 bag is only worth what a pawn shop will give you when you are desperate, she wore a polyester uniform that scratched her skin. She had to smile at rude customers who treated her like a servant, for the first time in her life. Tiffany Sterling was useful. She was providing a service. As for Marcus, his descent was less about character building and more about a complete collapse of the facade. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With the prenup and the evidence of adultery, he didn't have a leg to stand on. He left the penthouse with 2 suitcases and a crushing amount of debt that I now owned. He tried to get hired at other big firms. He walked into interviews with his charming smile and his resume, only to find that the doors were closed before he even sat down. In the tight-knit world of Chicago real estate, word travels faster than light. Everyone knew he had been fired for embezzlement and sleeping with the boss's daughter. He was radioactive. He ended up working for a shady, low-rent brokerage in the suburbs, selling foreclosure properties that smelled of cat urine and despair. He lived in a basement studio apartment with one window that looked out onto a brick wall. I knew this because I received his monthly payment checks. $150 a month, garnished from his meager commissions. Every check was a reminder that he was working for me now. But I did not spend my time gloating. I had better things to do. With the influx of capital from the Veritas lease and the Sterling equity, I finally executed the dream I had deferred for a decade. I did not just restore books anymore. I built a sanctuary for them. I bought the vacant building next to my library, a historic brick firehouse, and renovated it into the Bexley Center for the Preservation of Literature. It was a massive community space, part museum, part library, part workshop. It was designed to teach the art of restoration, to host literacy programs for underprivileged children, and to preserve the city's history. The grand opening was scheduled for a snowy Saturday in January. The air was crisp and clean. The new sign above the door was hand-painted in gold leaf. The press was there, not because I was a socialite, but because I was a philanthropist who had single-handedly funded the largest cultural grant in the district's history. I stood on the steps, wearing a coat of white cashmere. I looked out at the crowd. I saw neighbors who had brought their children. I saw students. I saw the mayor, who was eager to shake the hand of the woman who controlled the city's power grid. And then I saw him. He was standing across the street, huddled in a coat that looked too thin for the weather. He was watching me. Marcus. He looked thinner. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a little too long, curling over his collar. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent the last month replaying every mistake in his head. Our eyes met across the traffic, in the movies. This is the moment where the heroine feels a surge of triumphant rage. She glares at her ex-lover, letting him feel the heat of her hatred. Or perhaps she feels a pang of lingering sadness, a ghost of the love that used to be. I felt nothing. It was a strange, hollow sensation. I looked at him and I did not see a monster. I did not see a villain. I just saw a stranger. I saw a man who had occupied space in my life for 10 years but had never really occupied my soul. He was just a bad investment I had finally written off. Marcus took a step forward, as if he wanted to cross the street. As if he wanted to come apologize, or beg, or just hear his name on my lips one last time. I didn't frown. I didn't smile. I simply turned my head away. I turned to the man standing beside me. "Shall we cut the ribbon, Julian?" I asked. Julian was the head archivist I had hired from London to run the center. He was a man of quiet intelligence, with ink-stained fingers and a mind that could debate the finer points of binding glue for hours. He respected my mind. He did not want my money. He did not want my power. He just wanted to save books. "It would be my honor, Eleanor," Julian said, handing me the scissors. "You built this. It is your moment." "No," I corrected him, smiling. "We built this. It is our moment." I cut the red ribbon. The crowd cheered. The flashbulbs popped. When I looked back across the street, the spot where Marcus had been standing was empty. He had vanished, a ghost exorcised by the light of my new reality. The reception inside was warm and vibrant. I moved through the room, shaking hands, discussing programs, feeling the hum of life returning to the old building. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, I sat in my new office on the top floor. The desk was made of reclaimed oak. The view out the window was of the city lights, lights that were powered by the cables running through my land. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," I called out. It was Arthur. He walked in, looking pleased with himself, carrying a bottle of vintage champagne. "To the Queen of Chicago," he toasted, pouring 2 glasses. "Robert Sterling just sent over the quarterly projections. The stock is up. Your 20% stake has already gained $3 million in value." "Put it in the trust," I said, taking the glass. "Allocated for the Literacy Scholarship Fund." "You are a terrifying woman." "Eleanor," Arthur chuckled, "you could have bought a yacht. You could have bought an island. Instead, you are buying books for kids." "Yachts sink, Arthur," I said, taking a sip. "Islands get flooded, but knowledge, legacy, that is the only real estate that never depreciates." Arthur placed a document on my desk. "One last thing before I go," he said. "The final ratification of the Veritas board structure. It just needs your signature to make it official. Once you sign this, you have absolute veto power over everything Sterling does for the next 25 years. I looked at the document. It was the final nail in the coffin of the old regime. It was the key to the cage I had built for them, and the key to the kingdom I had built for myself. I picked up my pen. It was a heavy fountain pen, black lacquer and gold. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who hid in the library, the woman who wore beige so she wouldn't outshine her husband, the woman who let herself be called boring. I realized that woman didn't die. She just woke up. She realized that silence wasn't a weakness. Silence was just the pause before the thunder. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I signed my name. Not Mrs. Marcus Bexley. Not Eleanor. I signed the name that terrified billionaires. Eleanor V. Bexley Chairwoman. Veritas Holdings. I capped the pen and laid it down. The sound was a definitive click in the quiet room. "Done," I said. "Done," Arthur agreed. "So, what is next for the silence?" I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. I saw the crane on the Skyline Nova site, moving in the distance like a mechanical servant. I saw the lights of my library reflecting on the snow. I saw a future that was entirely, completely mine. "I think," I said, a small smile playing on my lips, "I am going to start a vegetable garden. The carrots are going to be magnificent this year." Never underestimate a woman just because she chooses silence. Because when she finally decides to speak, the whole world will have no choice but to listen. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you found satisfaction in Eleanor's journey from silence to power. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge and redemption, please scroll down to the comments section right now and tell me, Where are you listening from? Are you in your kitchen, on your commute, or relaxing in bed? I love reading your comments and knowing where our community is in the world. And please, do not forget to subscribe to the Sweet Rose Drama channel. Hit the like button on this video and smash that hype button. Your support helps these stories reach more people and allows us to keep bringing you the best dramas. Until next time.